My name is Sandra Whitfield, and I was 32 years old the night my father handed my life's work to my brother like it was a dinner roll. It was a Sunday, the first week of October, the kind of Atlanta evening where the heat finally breaks and everybody's porch light comes on early. We were gathered at my father's house on Cascade Road, the one my grandfather Earl Whitfield built with his own two hands back in 1974, the same year he started Whitfield Freight and Logistics with 2 trucks and a prayer. I'd grown up in that dining room. I'd done my homework at that table. And 11 years ago, I'd walked away from a marketing job in Charlotte to come run that company because my father asked me to. Before we continue, please hit that like button and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'd love to see how far this story reaches. Now let's continue. "Sit down, Sandy," my father, Robert Whitfield, said. He didn't look at me when he said it. That should have told me something. My brother Darnell sat across from me with his wife Keisha, and the way she kept smoothing the tablecloth with her palm, over and over, told me she already knew what was coming. "I've been thinking about the future of this company," my father started, folding his hands like he was about to say grace instead of gut me. "And it's decided, Darnell's gonna take over as CEO. The room went quiet enough to hear the ceiling fan ticking. "Dad," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I've run that company for 6 years. I built the Charlotte contract. I pulled us out of the red in 2021. I know what you did, baby." He finally looked at me, and there was something almost like pity in his eyes, which was worse than if he'd looked angry. "But Darnell has a family to feed. 2 kids and a mortgage. You'll figure something out. You always do." I sat there in my dead grandfather's house, in the chair I'd sat in since I was 6 years old, and I understood for the first time that in my father's eyes, my 11 years of work weighed less than my brother's last name on a marriage certificate. To understand how deep that knife went, you have to understand what I gave up. I was 21 when my mother, Patricia Whitfield, died of ovarian cancer. I remember sitting in the hospital hallway at Grady Memorial, my father's hand shaking in mine, and him saying, "Somebody's got to keep this family together, Sandy. Somebody's got to keep the business alive. Your grandfather built this from nothing." He wasn't asking Darnell, he was asking me. So I did. I left a job I loved. I moved back into my childhood bedroom at 23 because I couldn't afford my own place and pay off my mother's medical bills at the same time. I worked 80-hour weeks during the pandemic, personally driving routes myself when 2 of our drivers quit and we couldn't hire fast enough. I remember standing in the warehouse at 2 a.m. in December 2021, boxes stacked to the ceiling, calling every single client myself to tell them their shipments would be late, but they would not lose their contracts with us. Darnell was there too, sometimes. He'd show up to the office maybe 3 days a week, always with an excuse. Keisha needed him, his son had a game, he had a meeting that nobody could ever confirm existed. My father never said a word about it. Not once. I turned down a marriage proposal in 2020 because my fiancé, a good man named Julian, said he couldn't keep watching me disappear into that warehouse. I chose the company. I chose my father's dream. And now, at 32, single, exhausted, with 11 years of my life folded into that business like flour into batter, I was watching him hand it to a man who showed up 3 days a week. I didn't cry at the table. I promised myself that much. My Aunt Lorraine, my father's younger sister, was the one who broke the silence that Sunday night. "Robert," she said, setting her fork down hard enough that it rang against the china, "you cannot be serious right now. Lorraine, stay out of it." I will not stay out of it. That girl gave up her whole 20s for this family. She's out here running routes like a trucker at midnight, while Darnell's posting vacation pictures from Cancun. Keisha's head snapped up at that. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," Lorraine said. I watched my brother Darnell during all this, and here's the thing that still sits wrong with me. He didn't defend himself. He didn't say a single word in his own favor. He just looked down at his plate, jaw tight, like a man who already knew he didn't deserve what he was being handed but wanted it anyway. That told me something. Darnell wasn't stupid. He knew. My father's best friend and longtime accountant, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Renee Coleman, had been sitting quiet at the end of the table the whole time. Renee had done the company's books since before I was born. She caught my eye for half a second, and something in her expression, careful, guarded, like she was holding a secret behind her teeth, made my stomach turn. "Dad," I said, "why now? Why this sudden decision on a random Sunday?" He hesitated, just a flicker. But I'd spent 11 years reading that man's face across conference tables, and I knew a dodge when I saw one. "It's just time," he said. "That's all. It's decided." I looked at Renee again. She looked away first. Something was being hidden from me, and I intended to find out exactly what. I want to be clear about something. I did not go home that night and start plotting revenge. I'm not built that way. Not at first. I went home, I cried into my pillow like a little girl, and then the next morning, I put on my blazer and I went to my father's house to talk like an adult. "Dad, I'm not trying to fight you," I said, standing in his kitchen while he drank his coffee like this was any other Monday. "I'm asking you to reconsider. Not for me, for the company. Darnell doesn't know how to run payroll. He doesn't know our carrier contracts. He's never once sat through a DOT compliance audit. He'll learn. On whose dime? Our clients don't wait around for somebody to learn, Dad. Grandpa built this company on being dependable." My father set his mug down slow. "You think I don't know what you sacrificed, Sandy?" "I know. I watched you do it. But a man needs to provide for his family. That's just how it is. I'm your family too. You don't have kids depending on you." I felt something crack quietly in my chest, like ice under weight. "So, because I don't have children, my 11 years don't count the same as his 3 days a week?" He didn't answer that. He just picked his mug back up and looked out the window, and I understood that my father, a man I loved more than almost anyone on this earth, had already made peace with erasing me. I left that kitchen without raising my voice. I drove to the office, I did my job, I trained the new dispatch hire, and I smiled at clients on the phone, because I am not the kind of woman who burns a building down before she's checked every door. But that conversation was the moment I stopped hoping my father would change his mind and started paying very, very close attention. 2 weeks later, I was closing out the September financials when I found the first crack in the story I'd been told. There was a wire transfer, $85,000, out of the company's operating account, dated 4 months back, authorized by Darnell, who at the time held no signing authority on that account. I checked twice, then 3 times. My hands were actually shaking. I called Renee Coleman. "Renee, I need you to explain something to me, and I need the truth." There was a long pause on the line. "Sandy, $85,000, August 14th. Darnell's authorization code. He didn't have signing rights in August. How does that happen?" Renee sighed, and I heard a door close on her end, like she was making sure she was alone. "Your father added him to the account in July, quietly, before any of this announcement business." My stomach dropped through the floor. Before? So this wasn't a sudden decision. This was already in motion. "Sandy, I'm not supposed to." "Renee, please." The money went to Keisha's father. Darnell owes him. It's a debt from before the wedding. A bad investment Darnell made with her father's retirement money. Some crypto thing. Lost almost all of it. Her father's been threatening to expose it to the whole family, to Keisha, unless it gets repaid. I sat there in my office chair, the one I'd bought myself with my first real bonus check, and I felt 11 years of my life rearrange itself into a different shape entirely. This was never about a family to feed. This was about my father quietly bailing my brother out of a secret debt, using my company's money, and covering the hole by handing him control of the whole operation so nobody would ever ask questions again. I met Renee Coleman at a Waffle House off I-285 the next morning because some conversations shouldn't happen in an office with cameras. She looked older than I'd ever seen her, stirring her coffee without drinking it. Your grandfather Earl wrote the original succession clause himself back in 1998, right after his first heart attack, Renee said. I typed it up for him myself. It said the company goes to whichever child or grandchild demonstrates the capacity to grow and sustain the business. Not the oldest son. Not whoever has kids. Whoever earns it. Then how did Dad get the authority to just hand it over? Because your grandfather trusted your father to interpret that clause fairly when the time came. Roberts had legal authority to name a successor since Earl passed in 2015. He's just never used it. Until now. So my father used a document meant to protect the company's future to cover up my brother's gambling debt. Renee flinched at the word gambling, but she didn't correct me. I told him it was wrong, Sandy. I told him the day he asked me to add Darnell to that account. He said, and I'm quoting him exactly, "She'll bounce back. She always does. Darnell won't survive this if it comes out." Hearing my own father's words secondhand, spoken so plainly, cracked something open in me that 11 years of overtime never had. Why are you telling me this now? Renee finally looked up at me, and her eyes were wet. Because your grandfather was my friend for 40 years, and he did not build that company so it could become a shield for a grown man's bad decisions. And because you deserve the truth, even if it costs me my job. I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. It won't cost you your job, I said. It's going to cost my father something far bigger. I gave my father one more chance. I owed him that much, for my mother's sake if nothing else. I drove back to Cascade Road that Friday evening with printed bank statements in a manila folder, my hands cold despite the warm October air. Dad, I know about the $85,000. I know about Keisha's father. I know this whole thing was decided back in July, not last Sunday. My father's face went through something complicated. Shock, then anger, then, worst of all, a kind of tired resignation, like a man who'd known this day was coming and was almost relieved it finally had. You went digging through the books, he said. I run the company, Dad. It's my job to know the books. Not anymore, apparently, he snapped. And there it was, the moral line, right there, crossed clean in half. So that's it? You bail Darnell out with company funds he had no right to touch. You hide it from me for 3 months, and when I find the truth, your response is to remind me I'm being replaced? Watch your tone. No, I said, and my voice came out steadier and colder than I'd ever heard it. I have watched my tone for 11 years, Dad. I watched my tone while I buried Mama. I watched my tone while I drove Roots at 2 a.m. I watched my tone while you handed my life's work to a man who gambled away his father-in-law's retirement and let you clean it up with my company's money. My father stood there in his own kitchen, in the house his father built, and for the first time in my life, he had absolutely nothing to say to me. It's decided, I said quietly, giving him back his own words. I'm done being reasonable. Whitfield Freight and Logistics had a 5-person advisory board, a formality my grandfather set up in the 90s, mostly old family friends and one retired judge, Harold Bishop, who'd known Earl Whitfield since Korea. I requested an emergency session for the following Thursday. My father assumed I was going to fight for my job with sentiment. Instead, I brought documents. I laid out the unauthorized $85,000 wire, the forged signing authority dated weeks before any official succession announcement. Renee, sitting quiet and resolute beside me, confirmed every figure under oath, her voice shaking but never breaking. Darnell showed up 20 minutes late, and when he understood what was happening, His face went the color of ash. "Sandy, come on," he said. "You're really about to do this in front of everybody." "You did this, Darnell," I said. "The day you signed your name to a check you had no legal right to authorize." Judge Bishop, silver-haired and unshakable, folded his hands on the table exactly the way my grandfather used to. "Robert," he said, "did you knowingly authorize your son to draw against company operating funds to settle a personal debt without disclosure to your VP of operations or this board?" My father's silence answered for him. "Then per the original 1998 succession clause your own father drafted," Judge Bishop continued, "any succession decision made under concealment or breach of fiduciary duty is void. This board is obligated to review the true operating record, which shows Sandra Whitfield has led this company's growth for 6 consecutive years, and Darnell Whitfield has an outstanding, undisclosed debt to the business itself." Keisha, sitting in the back row, put her face in her hands. Not for me, for the marriage she was realizing she didn't fully know. My father looked at me across that table, and for the first time in my entire life, I watched him understand exactly what he stood to lose. The board's vote was unanimous. Darnell was removed from any operational authority, ordered to repay the $85,000 on a court-supervised schedule, and my father was formally reprimanded, though as majority shareholder, the final call on leadership still technically sat with him. That's the part nobody warns you about. Winning the truth doesn't automatically hand you justice. My father still had the power to dig in out of pride. He didn't, though, not in the end. He came to my apartment 3 nights later, something he'd never done in the 11 years I'd lived there. He stood in my doorway looking older than I'd ever seen him. "I was wrong," he said. "No preamble. I told myself I was protecting your brother's family, but I was protecting my own guilt. I let your grandmother's boy grow up soft because I never held him accountable, and I almost let that softness cost you everything you built." "Why didn't you just ask me for help with the debt, Dad?" "I would have found a way." "Because I was ashamed," he said, and his voice cracked in a way I'd never heard from him. "Ashamed I raised a son who needed rescuing, and ashamed I almost sacrificed my daughter to hide it." I didn't hug him right away. Some wounds need air before they need comfort. "I'm not doing this so you'll apologize, Dad," I said. "I did it because Grandpa built something real, and I refused to watch it turned into a cover story." He nodded slowly. "The board's putting you up for CEO. Officially, I'm not fighting it." For once in my life, I believed him. 6 months later, I stood in the warehouse on Fulton Industrial Boulevard at 7 a.m., watching my drivers load roots under a banner Renee had insisted on hanging. Earl Whitfield Freight and Logistics, EST, 1974, dependable since day one. We landed the Piedmont Regional contract that spring, the biggest in company history. Renee stayed on as CFO, finally with the title she'd earned decades ago. Judge Bishop retired from the board, but still calls me every quarter, just to check the numbers, just because he promised my grandfather he would. Darnell finished repaying the debt 8 months early. He works logistics for a competitor now, entry level, learning the business the way I once did, from the ground floor. We talk sometimes. It's careful, but it's honest, which is more than we had before. My father comes by the office on Fridays now, not to run anything, just to sit in the break room and drink coffee with the drivers, the way his father used to. We're rebuilding something slower than a company. We're rebuilding trust. And me? I bought a house of my own last month, 4 miles from Cascade Road, close enough for family dinners, far enough to breathe. Julian and I started talking again in the spring. No promises yet, but no walls either. I think about that Sunday dinner sometimes, my father's voice saying, "It's decided," like my whole life was a line item he could reassign. He was right about one thing, though. It was decided. Just not by him. If this story made you think, smile, or even gave you chills, show it some love with a like and subscribe for more powerful stories. And before you go, tell me in the comments what you think happened next. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon.